She didn't know the Alpha King had returned to the castle after 3 months away. She didn't know that today, for the first time in decades, he would personally inspect every corner of his domain. And she certainly didn't know that he was standing outside her cell door right now, his hand frozen on the rusted iron handle, amber eyes blazing with something that looked dangerously close to rage. Lyra pressed her back against the cold stone wall, listening to the echo of boots in the corridor above. Heavy boots, different from the guards who shuffled past twice a day with stale bread and murky water. These boots belonged to someone who owned the ground they walked on. 2 years, 730 days of counting stones in the wall, of rationing crumbs, of telling herself that tomorrow someone would remember she existed. Tomorrow someone would realize the truth. Tomorrow the nightmare would end. But tomorrows had a way of becoming yesterdays down here in the forgotten depths of the Shadowmere dungeons. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to ward off the dampness that had seeped into her bones months ago. Her fingers found the small crack in the wall where she'd hidden her most precious possession, a withered flower she'd managed to keep alive through sheer stubborn will and tiny drops of water saved from her daily ration. The footsteps stopped. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as silence pressed against her eardrums. Then came the scrape of metal against metal, the protest of hinges that hadn't been oiled in decades. Light spilled into her cell. Real light, not the sickly glow of the torch brackets that barely penetrated the gloom. She squinted against it, raising a hand to shield her eyes, and saw a silhouette filling the doorway. Tall, broad, radiating authority that made the very air vibrate with power. Gods above and below. The voice was deep, rough with an emotion she couldn't name. What have they done? Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as the figure stepped into her cell. She'd heard that voice before, years ago, when she'd been just another servant in the castle's vast hierarchy. Alpha King Cale Ravencrest, the most powerful shifter in the Northern Territories, the man whose mate had died 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances, the man whose Luna's death had somehow become her fault. "Who put you here?" He crouched down so they were eye level, and Lyra felt something impossible happen. Something warm and golden unfurled in her chest, like a flower blooming in fast forward. Her wolf, who had been silent for so long she thought it dead, stirred with interest. "Does it matter?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. "No one remembers I exist." His amber eyes, wolf eyes even in human form, searched her face with an intensity that made her want to disappear. "I remember now." The golden warmth in her chest pulsed stronger. This was impossible. This was dangerous. This was everything she'd given up hoping for. Lyra Ashwood. He said her name like he was testing the weight of it. Accused of poisoning Luna Catherine, sentenced to life imprisonment without trial. His jaw clenched. 2 years ago? She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He knew. He knew exactly who she was and why she was here, and yet he was looking at her like she was precious instead of poisonous. "The servant said you confessed." There was something careful in his tone now, like he was walking through a field of glass. "I confessed to ease her passing." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She was dying anyway. The real poison was already in her system for hours before I brought the tea. But she was in such pain, and I had the mercy herbs. She trailed off. She'd explained this to the guards, to the servants, to anyone who would listen in those first desperate weeks. No one had cared about the difference between murder and mercy. "But you didn't kill her." It wasn't a question. Lyra stared at him, searching for the trap, the trick, the moment he would reveal this was all an elaborate form of torture. "No, I didn't kill her." "Then why are you still here?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications she didn't dare examine. "Because no one cared enough to investigate further, because I'm nobody, because it was easier to blame the servant than look for the real killer." Kyle's eyes flashed, literally flashed with golden light. "Nobody." He repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "You're not nobody, Lyra Ashwood. You never were." The warmth in her chest spread, reaching fingers of heat down her arms, up her throat. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely impossible. "You're coming with me?" He stood, extending a hand that she stared at like it might burst into flames. "I have nowhere to go." "You have everywhere to go." His hand remained steady, patient, waiting. Starting with a bath, a meal, and clothes that weren't designed for punishment. Lyra looked at his outstretched hand, at his face, which showed no disgust for her unwashed state, no fear of her alleged crimes, at the light streaming in behind him that seemed to promise something she'd forgotten how to want. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, the golden warmth exploded through her entire body. She gasped, and she saw his pupils dilate, saw his nostrils flare as he scented something that made his wolf rise to the surface. "Impossible," she breathed, "not impossible." His thumb brushed over her knuckles, gentle despite the calluses that spoke of weapons and warfare. "Just long overdue." He helped her to her feet, and Lyra realised she'd forgotten how tall she was, how her body was supposed to move when it wasn't constantly curved in on itself for warmth and protection. She swayed slightly, and his free hand came to steady her at the waist. "Easy. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday, I think." Time had a way of blurring together down here. His jaw tightened again. "Come, we're getting you fed properly." As they moved toward the cell door, Lyra caught a glimpse of herself in a piece of polished metal that served as a mirror. Hollow cheeks, matted hair, eyes too large in a face that had learned to expect nothing. I don't look like—" She gestured helplessly at herself. Kyle stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "You look like someone who survived something that should have killed her. You look like someone strong enough to endure 2 years of hell and still stand when the door finally opened." His voice dropped to something almost reverent. "You look like exactly who I've been waiting for." The golden thread between them pulsed, and Lyra felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd forgotten the word for it. Hope. The whispers started the moment they emerged from the dungeon stairwell. "Is that the poisoner? Why is the Alpha King? Gods, look at the state of her." Lyra kept her eyes fixed on Cale's broad shoulders as he cut a path through the main corridor of Shadowmere Castle. Servants pressed themselves against the walls, their shocked faces blurring past like a fever dream. She could feel their stares burning into her skin, could smell their fear and confusion mixing with the scents of beeswax and fresh bread that meant the castle was alive and thriving above ground. How strange that the world had continued spinning while she rotted below. Kyle's hand remained steady at the small of her back, a warm anchor in the storm of sensation threatening to overwhelm her. Every step on the polished stone floors sent vibrations up through her bare feet. Every breath brought new smells that made her head spin with their richness. Even the light streaming through the tall windows felt too bright, too much after so long in near darkness. "Here." He stopped in front of a door carved with intricate moon phases, the symbol of the lunar quarters. Lyra's heart stuttered. "This can't be right." "It's exactly right." Kyle pushed open the door, revealing a suite of rooms that took her breath away. Afternoon sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating furniture that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Rich blues and silvers, soft fabrics, surfaces that gleamed with care and attention. The lunar suite. Her voice was barely a whisper. But this was Catherine's. "Catherine is gone." There was grief in his voice, but also something else, something that sounded like acceptance. "These rooms have been empty too long. They need life in them again." A woman appeared in the doorway as if summoned, older, with kind eyes and greying hair pinned back in a practical bun. "Your Majesty." "Mara, this is Lyra. She'll be staying in the lunar quarters indefinitely." Kyle's tone brooked no argument. See that she has everything she needs, clothes, food, medical attention if required." Mara's eyes widened slightly, but to her credit she simply nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty. Miss, if you'd like to follow me." Lyra looked between them, feeling like she'd stumbled into someone else's dream. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" Kyle turned to face her fully, and again she felt that impossible warmth bloom in her chest. "Because you deserve better than what you've been given. Because everyone deserves a chance to heal." His amber eyes held hers steadily. "And because something tells me you're exactly where you're supposed to be." The golden thread pulsed between them, and Lyra had to grip the doorframe to keep from swaying. "I'll leave you to get settled." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something else, then simply added, "I'll send word about dinner later." When he was gone, the silence felt deafening. Mara cleared her throat gently. "Shall we start with a bath, miss? There's a private bathing chamber through here." Lyra followed her deeper into the suite, past a sitting area with books and embroidery and all the delicate luxuries she'd once served but never owned. The bathing chamber was a revelation, a sunken tub carved from white marble, already steaming with water that smelled of lavender and something else, something green and growing. "I took the liberty of preparing this when His Majesty sent word." Mara began laying out soaps and soft towels. "There are clean clothes on the bed when you're ready." "Mara," Lyra caught the woman's arm as she turned to go. "Why aren't you afraid of me? Everyone else thinks I'm a murderer." The older woman studied her with those kind eyes, and Lyra felt like she was being read like an open book. "I was Luna Catherine's personal maid for 15 years. I know exactly what happened the night she died, and it wasn't murder." She patted Lyra's hand gently. "It was mercy, child, the kind of mercy that takes courage most people don't possess." Alone again, Lyra stared at the steaming bath like it might disappear if she blinked. When had she last been truly clean? When had hot water touched her skin? She shed the rags that had served as clothes for 2 years, stepping into water so perfect it made her gasp. The warmth seeped into muscles that had been clenched with cold for so long she'd forgotten they could relax. She sank deeper, letting the water cover her shoulders, her neck, washing away layers of grime and despair. Her hair, when she finally worked up the courage to dunk it, ran brown with dirt before gradually lightening to its natural auburn. She scrubbed until her skin was pink and raw, as if she could wash away the memory of those stone walls and rusty bars. When she finally emerged, wrapping herself in a towel softer than anything she'd ever touched, she caught sight of herself in the polished mirror above the washing basin. The woman staring back was a stranger. Thin, yes, marked by hardship, but alive. Her green eyes weren't as dull as she'd expected. Her cheekbones, sharp from hunger, gave her face an elegant quality she'd never noticed before. She looked like someone who had survived something terrible and might be ready to live again. The clothes Mara had left were simple but beautiful, a dress in deep forest green that brought out her eyes, soft leather slippers that fit perfectly, a cream-coloured shawl that felt like wearing a cloud. When she looked in the mirror again, she saw a woman who belonged in a Luna's suite, not a prisoner who'd stumbled into one by accident. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Mara entered carrying a tray that made Lyra's mouth water instantly. "I thought you might be hungry. His Majesty suggested starting with something light." The food was artfully arranged but simple. Fresh bread still warm from the ovens, creamy butter, honey that caught the afternoon light like liquid gold, fruits she hadn't tasted in years. Lyra forced herself to eat slowly, to savour each bite instead of wolfing it down like the starving creature she'd been hours ago. The kitchen staff prepared several options, Mara said, settling into a chair across from her. His Majesty was very specific that you should have choices. Choices. Lyra repeated the word like it was foreign. I haven't had choices in so long, I'd forgotten what they felt like. You have them now. Mara's voice was firm. Starting with dinner tonight, His Majesty extended an invitation, but there's no obligation. You can eat here if you prefer." Lyra considered this, turning it over in her mind. The safe choice would be to stay hidden, to avoid the stares and whispers and the dangerous warmth that bloomed every time she met those amber eyes. The brave choice would be to face whatever came next head on. "I think," she said slowly, "I've been hiding long enough." As evening approached, Mara helped her prepare, pinning her clean hair in a simple but elegant style and adding a touch of colour to lips that had forgotten what it felt like to smile. When Lyra looked in the mirror one last time, she saw something she hadn't expected to see again. She saw hope. The walk to the private dining chamber felt like travelling between worlds. Servants still stared, but now there was curiosity mixed with the fear, speculation replacing some of the certainty. She was no longer the forgotten prisoner. She was something new, something undefined, something that belonged to the Alpha King in ways no one quite understood. Kyle was waiting for her when she arrived, and the expression on his face when he saw her made that golden warmth flare so bright she had to catch her breath. "Beautiful," he said simply, and she believed him. The meal was intimate, just the two of them at a small table set before a window that looked out over the castle gardens. He asked her about her life before, about her family, about dreams she'd once had. She found herself talking more than she had in years, sharing pieces of herself she'd thought were lost forever. "You said you were nobody," he said as they finished the main course. "But you grew up in these halls, you know every servant by name, you've seen how power works, how politics move beneath the surface." His eyes were intent on hers. "That doesn't sound like nobody to me. I was a servant's daughter, lower than low. And now?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities she didn't dare name. "I don't know what I am now." "You're someone who deserves to find out." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The contact sent electricity up her arm. "You're someone who deserves time to discover who she is when she's not just surviving." The golden thread between them hummed with contentment, with rightness, with something that felt dangerously like belonging. "Stay close," he said, as they prepared to part for the evening. "There are still enemies in this castle, people who benefited from seeing you silenced. Until we know who they are, I need you where I can protect you." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the candlelight. "Because," he said finally, "some bonds transcend logic. Some connections exist before we're ready for them, and sometimes the person we need most comes to us in the most unexpected way." That night, lying in the Luna's bed beneath sheets that smelled of sunshine and cedar, Lyra stared up at the ceiling and tried to understand what was happening to her. The golden warmth in her chest had settled into something constant now, a gentle pulse that matched her heartbeat. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new opportunities to hope or despair. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, she was clean and fed and warm and safe. Tonight, she was alive. The feeling of being watched started on her third morning in the Luna quarters. Lyra had begun to settle into a routine that felt dangerously close to normal. Wake with the sunrise streaming through windows she could actually see out of. Dress in clothes that fit properly and smelled of lavender instead of despair. Breakfast with Mara, who had become something Lyra had never expected to find again, a friend. But today, as she walked through the castle gardens with a book Cale had recommended, the sensation of eyes following her movements made the fine hairs on her neck stand on end. She paused beside a fountain, pretending to read while scanning the courtyard with her peripheral vision. There, a flash of midnight blue silk behind a pillar. The rustle of fabric retreating when she turned her head. "Enjoying your stolen paradise?" The voice came from directly behind her, cold as winter frost. Lyra spun around to find herself face to face with a woman who could have been carved from ice and starlight. Pale blonde hair swept into an elaborate style, silver eyes that held all the warmth of a blade, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Lady Morgana. The name came to her from half-remembered whispers in the servants' quarters, Catherine's younger sister, the woman who had wept so beautifully at the funeral, who had demanded justice for her beloved sibling's death. How refreshing that the murderer remembers my name. Morgana's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Though I suppose you would, considering you robbed me of the only family I had left. The golden thread in Lyra's chest constricted, but she forced herself to stand straight. I didn't kill your sister. Of course you did, though I admit your methods were creative. Morgana began to circle her like a predator, sizing up wounded prey, poison her slowly, gain her trust, then finish the job with a final dose disguised as mercy. Quite the long game. That's not what happened, isn't it? Morgana stopped directly in front of her, close enough that Lyra could smell her perfume, something expensive and cloying that seemed to coat the back of her throat. Then explain how a servant girl with no connections, no value, no purpose, has somehow enchanted the Alpha King into housing you in my sister's rooms, into dressing you in silk and treating you like... Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper, like you matter. The words hit harder than any physical blow, because they echoed the voice in Lyra's own head, the one that whispered she was dreaming, that this couldn't last, that she was still nobody pretending to be somebody. How convenient, Morgana continued, that you've managed to bewitch him just like you poisoned Catherine. Dark magic runs in patterns, doesn't it? I haven't done anything to him. But even as she said it, Lyra felt doubt creep in. The golden warmth, the impossible connection, the way he looked at her like she was precious. What if it wasn't real? What if somehow, without knowing how, she was influencing him? Haven't you? Morgana's laugh was like breaking glass. A man who hasn't so much as glanced at another woman since Catherine's death suddenly takes a murderer from the dungeons and installs her in the lunar suite? That sounds like enchantment to me. Morgana. Cale's voice cut across the garden like a blade. Both women turned to see him striding toward them, and Lyra's wolf practically purred at the sight of him. His amber eyes were blazing with controlled fury, his jaw set in a way that promised violence to anyone who threatened what he protected. Your Majesty. Morgana's demeanour shifted instantly, becoming the picture of grief-stricken nobility. I was just reacquainting myself with your guest. Were you? It wasn't a question, wasn't a... Cale moved to stand between them, and Lyra felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. How thoughtful of you to welcome her personally. Of course, Catherine would have wanted me to extend every courtesy to whatever this is. The pause before whatever this is was deliberate, calculated to wound. Cale's eyes flashed gold. Question her again, and you'll answer to me personally. The threat hung in the air between them, and Lyra saw something flicker across Morgana's perfect features. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like calculation. Of course, Your Majesty, I meant no offence. Morgana dipped into a perfect curtsy. I'm sure we'll have many more opportunities to chat. The smile she gave Lyra was pure poison. After all, I'm certain she'll be here for a very long time. When she was gone, Cale turned to Lyra with concern written across his features. Are you all right? What did she say to you? Nothing that wasn't true. The words escaped before she could stop them, and she saw his expression darken. What do you mean? Lyra looked away, unable to meet those amber eyes that saw too much. I don't belong here. I don't know why you're being kind to me, but she's right. I'm nobody. I'm a servant's daughter who was convenient to blame for a Luna's death. Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Lyra? His voice was gentle, but when she didn't look at him, his hands came up to frame her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. Do you trust me? The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. Did she trust him? This man who had pulled her from hell and given her heaven? This Alpha King who looked at her like she was worth protecting? "I don't know how to trust," she whispered. "It's been beaten out of me." "Then let me teach you." His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, and the golden thread between them pulsed with warmth. "Starting with this, you are not nobody. You are not convenient. You are not a mistake I'm making out of misplaced sympathy." "Then what am I?" His eyes searched hers for a long moment. "You're mine," he said simply, "and I don't make mistakes about what belongs to me." That afternoon, as Lyra tried to lose herself in the library, she overheard a conversation that made her blood turn to ice. Needs to be dealt with before she causes more damage. "The Alpha King is clearly under some sort of influence. Never would have looked twice at a servant girl if she hadn't done something to him. My lady has a plan. It will all be over soon." Lyra pressed herself deeper into the alcove between the bookshelves, heart hammering as two guards moved past, their voices fading down the corridor. A plan. Morgana had a plan to deal with her. She had to warn Kyle, had to tell him what she'd heard, even if it meant admitting she'd been eavesdropping. But as she hurried through the castle corridors, a commotion in the training yard drew her attention. A crowd had gathered around something, voices raised in excitement and alarm. Lyra pushed through the outer ring of observers and felt her world tilt on its axis. A guard lay on the ground, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, bone visible through torn flesh. The injury was gruesome, clearly severe enough to end his career, if not his life. The castle physician knelt beside him, shaking his head grimly. Too much damage. Even if the bone heals, he'll never walk properly again. Something inside Lyra snapped. She'd seen too much suffering, too much unnecessary pain. Without thinking, she pushed through the crowd and dropped to her knees beside the injured man. "What are you doing?" The physician tried to stop her. "This is no place for—" Lyra placed her hands on the guard's leg and felt the world explode into sensation. Heat poured through her palms into the broken bone and torn muscle. Light, actual light, began to emanate from where her skin touched his, warm and golden and impossible. The guard's agonized groans faded to sighs of relief as bone knitted back together, as flesh regrew, as what had been shattered became whole. When she lifted her hands, the leg was perfect. Not just healed, perfect, as if it had never been injured at all. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the whispers started. "Dark magic." "Unnatural. She's a witch." "How else could she—" Lyra looked around at the faces surrounding her and saw fear. Not wonder at the miracle of healing, but terror at the power she'd displayed. Power they didn't understand, couldn't control, wouldn't accept. "Lyra," Kyle's voice cut through the chaos as he pushed through the crowd. His amber eyes were wide with something that might have been awe. "How did you—" "I don't know." The truth felt inadequate, but it was all she had. "I saw him suffering and I couldn't stand it. Something inside me just responded." He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. Her palms were still warm, still tingling with residual power. "This is what you are," he said quietly. "This is why the bond called to you." "What do you mean?" "Mate bonds don't just connect souls. They awaken what's dormant, strengthen what's already there. Your gift for healing, your ability to take pain away, it was always part of you. The bond just amplified it." The crowd was still watching, still whispering, and Lyra could feel their fear pressing against her like a physical weight. "They think I'm dangerous." "You are dangerous." His smile was fierce, proud. "You're dangerous to those who profit from suffering. You're dangerous to those who want to keep others broken." His hands tightened on hers. "And that makes you exactly what this pack needs." But as they walked back to the castle together, Lyra caught sight of Morgana watching from an upper window. The woman's face was a mask of cold fury, and Lyra knew with crystal certainty that her display of power had just moved her from inconvenience to active threat. The golden thread in her chest pulsed with warmth as Cale's arm came around her shoulders, protective and sure. But for the first time since leaving the dungeons, Lyra felt the shadow of real danger creeping back into her world. "You can leave," he said that evening as they stood together in the Luna's garden. The words seemed torn from him, reluctant and painful. "I can arrange protection, Gold, safe passage to any territory you choose. You'd be free to start over, to build a life away from all of this." Lyra looked at him, this alpha king who was offering to give up his mate rather than see her hurt. This man who would sacrifice his own happiness for her safety. "Or," she asked because she could hear the unspoken alternative in his voice, "or you stay and face whatever comes next with me. Face the danger, the politics, the people who'll never understand what you are or why you matter." His amber eyes held hers steadily. "Face it all and trust that what we have is stronger than what they can throw at us." The choice should have been easy. Safety versus uncertainty. Freedom versus a fight she might not win. But as she looked into his eyes, felt the golden thread binding them together, remembered the warmth of belonging she'd found in his arms, Lyra realised she'd already made her decision the moment she'd taken his hand in that dungeon cell. "I've been running my whole life," she said quietly, "from poverty, from powerlessness, from people who wanted to use me or hurt me or forget I existed." She reached up to touch his face, smiling as he leaned into her palm. "I'm tired of running, Kyle, and for the first time I have something worth standing still for." His kiss tasted like coming home, like promises kept and futures possible. And when he whispered mine against her lips, Lyra whispered back the most important truth she'd ever spoken. "Yours?" The war for her place in this world was coming. But tonight, wrapped in the arms of the only man who'd ever seen her true worth, Lyra felt ready to fight. The evidence found her instead of the other way around. Lyra was arranging flowers in Catherine's former sitting room when a loose floorboard caught her attention. The wood shifted under her foot with a soft creak, revealing a gap just wide enough for slender fingers to explore. What she pulled out from the hidden space made her blood turn to ice. Letters, dozens of them, tied with black ribbon and written in two distinct hands. The first she recognised as Catherine's elegant script. The second. "My dearest sister," one began in Catherine's flowing letters. "I fear my suspicions are proving correct. The weakness spells are growing stronger, and I believe someone is administering them regularly. If something happens to me, look to those who benefit most from my death. Look to those who would see a new Luna in my place." The responding letter made Lyra's hands shake. "Sweet Catherine, you worry for nothing. The herbs I've been adding to your tea are merely to help you sleep. Your husband suspects nothing, and soon you'll be at peace. When you're gone, I'll make sure justice is served. That servant girl will pay for your death, and I'll be here to comfort your grieving widower. Everything is proceeding perfectly. Your loving sister, Morgana." More letters revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Months of slow poisoning, carefully calculated to mimic a wasting illness. Bribery of guards and servants. The deliberate setup of Lyra as the perfect scapegoat. A nobody whose word would never be believed against nobility. She knew. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper as she traced Catherine's increasingly desperate handwriting. She knew her own sister was killing her, and she was trying to protect me even then. The last letter was dated just 2 days before Catherine's death, her writing weak but determined. "I've hidden the truth where only the right person will find it. If I die, know that the servant girl is innocent. She showed me more kindness in my final days than my own blood did in years. Protect her, Kyle. She deserves better than the world I'm leaving behind." Lyra was still staring at the letters when footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy, purposeful, accompanied by the rustle of silk and the click of heeled slippers. "Well, well, what has our little murderess discovered?" Morgana stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards, her silver eyes glittering with cold amusement. Behind her, Lyra could see more figures, courtiers, servants, members of the pack's inner circle, an audience for whatever was about to unfold. "I know what you did." Lyra stood slowly, the letters clutched in her hands. "I know you killed your own sister." "Do you?" Morgana stepped into the room, her smile sharp as a blade. "And who exactly do you think will believe the word of a convicted poisoner over a grieving sister of noble blood?" "The Alpha King will believe me." "Will he?" Morgana's laugh was like ice cracking. "Even when I tell the entire pack how you've been using dark magic to seduce him, how you've twisted his mind with unnatural power until he can't think clearly?" The crowd behind her murmured agreement, their faces reflecting fear and suspicion. Lyra felt the weight of their judgment pressing against her, suffocating in its intensity. "She practices witchcraft," called out one of the courtiers. "We all saw what she did to that guard. Healing like that isn't natural." "She's bewitched the Alpha King," added another voice. "Made him forget his duty to his dead mate's memory." "The law is clear," Morgana said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Those who use dark magic to manipulate others must face trial by combat. Let her prove her innocence through strength if she can." "No." The word tore from Lyra's throat. "I invoke the right of truth-telling, ancient law. Let the pack judge who speaks honestly." But Morgana was already shaking her head. "Too late for that, I'm afraid. The challenge has been issued in front of witnesses. Trial by combat it is." The crowd parted as Kyle arrived, his amber eyes blazing with fury as he took in the scene. "What is the meaning of this?" "Your guest has been accused of using dark magic to manipulate you, Your Majesty." Morgana's voice dripped false concern. As is her right, she has chosen to prove her innocence through trial by combat. "I didn't choose anything," Lyra protested, but Morgana talked over her. "Of course, she may name a champion to fight in her place, as is traditional for those too weak to defend themselves." Kyle stepped forward immediately. "I'll stand as her champion." "No." Morgana's smile was triumphant. "Ancient law forbids it. The accused's mate cannot serve as champion. Too much bias, you understand. She must choose another, or face the trial herself." Lyra felt the trap closing around her like iron bars. This had all been planned, carefully orchestrated to put her in an impossible position. Fight a battle she couldn't win, or admit defeat and face execution for crimes she didn't commit. "I can't fight for you in this," Kyle said, his voice rough with frustration and pain. "The law binds even me." Lyra looked at the faces surrounding her, some sympathetic, but most reflecting the fear and suspicion that Morgana had so skillfully cultivated. These people would never accept her, never trust her, unless she proved herself in the most definitive way possible. "Then I'll fight for myself." The words came out stronger than she felt. "For us." Morgana's smile widened. "Excellent. I name Sir Roderick as my champion." The crowd parted again, and Lyra's heart sank. Sir Roderick was a mountain of a man, a seasoned warrior whose arms were thicker than her waist. Scars crisscrossed his exposed chest and arms, testament to countless battles survived. He looked at her with something that might have been pity. "I take no pleasure in this," he said quietly, "but the law must be served." The trial ground was set in the castle's main courtyard, with the entire pack gathered to witness. Lyra stood in the centre of the circle, wearing simple fighting leathers that felt alien on her frame. She'd been given a sword, but the weapon felt clumsy and unfamiliar in her hands. Across from her, Roderick looked like a force of nature made flesh. "This is madness," Kyle growled from where he stood with the other witnesses. "She's not a warrior. This isn't justice, it's murder." "The law is the law," Morgana replied sweetly. "She made her choice." The herald raised his voice. "Trial by combat to determine the truth of accusations made. Let the fighters prove their case through strength and will. Begin." Roderick moved faster than a man his size had any right to. His sword whistled through the air where Lyra's head had been a heartbeat before, and she realized with crystal clarity that he wasn't going to hold back just because she was small and untrained. She dodged, rolled, desperately tried to keep distance between them as his blade carved through the space she'd occupied. The crowd's roars faded to a distant buzz as her world narrowed to the deadly dance of survival. But she was tiring quickly, and they both knew it. Roderick's next strike caught her sword, sending vibrations up her arm that made her fingers go numb. The blade flew from her grasp, clattering across the stone courtyard. She was disarmed, defenseless, staring up at a man who could end her life with a single blow. Time seemed to slow as Roderick raised his sword for the killing strike, and something inside Lyra exploded. Power poured out of her in a wave that made the very air shimmer. But this wasn't the gentle healing energy she'd used on the guard. This was something primal, protective, fierce as a mother wolf defending her cubs. Light blazed from her skin, warm and golden and impossible to ignore. Roderick's sword stopped mid-swing, held motionless by invisible force. His eyes went wide with shock as the light surrounded him, sank into him, and suddenly his expression changed from grim determination to wonder. "I remember," he whispered, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "She came to my quarters 3 years ago, Lady Morgana. She paid me to spread rumours about the servant girl, to make sure everyone knew she'd been in the Luna's chambers that night. She said—" He turned to face Morgana, his scarred features twisting with disgust. "She said it was justice, that the girl had been stealing from the Luna. But it wasn't about theft, was it? It was about murder." The crowd's murmur became a roar. Morgana's perfect composure finally cracked. "You're under her spell," she snarled. "Can't you see she's controlling him?" But Roderick was shaking his head. "No spells, just truth. Truth I should have spoken 3 years ago when an innocent girl was thrown in the dungeons for your crimes." Other voices began to rise from the crowd. Servants who had been paid to lie, guards who had been bribed to look the other way, courtiers who had been promised advancement for their silence. The web of conspiracy that Morgana had woven so carefully began to unravel as Lyra's power touched them one by one. Not mind control, not manipulation, just the simple, devastating power of truth laid bare for all to see. "Stop this!" Morgana screamed, her mask finally slipping completely. "I am Luna Catherine's sister. I demand—" "You are a sister who murdered her own blood." Kyle's voice cut across the courtyard like a blade, cold and final. "You are a conspirator who condemned an innocent woman to hell for your own ambition, and you are no longer welcome in my territory." The golden light around Lyra began to fade, but the warmth in her chest burned brighter than ever. She looked up at Kyle, at the pride and love blazing in his amber eyes, and felt something settle into place deep in her soul. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was exactly where she belonged. "Justice," she said quietly, and her voice somehow carried to every corner of the courtyard. Not revenge, not hatred, just truth finally brought to light. As the guards moved to arrest Morgana and her conspirators, as the crowd began to disperse with excited chatter about all they'd witnessed, Lyra remained in the centre of the trial ground. Exhausted, drained, but finally, truly free. Kale's arms came around her, warm and solid and safe, and she let herself collapse against his strength. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "The truth is known. Justice is served. It's over." But even as relief flooded through her, Lyra knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The dawn of her coronation broke clear and golden, as if the sun itself was celebrating. Lyra stood at the window of the lunar chambers, watching the castle come alive with preparation. Servants hurried across the courtyard, carrying garlands of flowers and silken banners. The scent of baking bread and roasting meat drifted up from the kitchens. Even from this distance, she could hear the laughter and excited chatter of pack members arriving for the ceremony. It had been a week since the trial, a week since Morgana's web of lies had finally been torn apart. The former lady was now locked in the same dungeon cell where Lyra had spent 2 years, awaiting transportation to a territory where her crimes would be judged by neutral parties. Justice, Kyle had said, not revenge. But today wasn't about looking backward. Today was about stepping into the future she'd never dared to dream possible. Second thoughts? Mara appeared beside her, arms full of the most beautiful dress Lyra had ever seen. It was the colour of moonlight and starshine, silver silk that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The bodice was embroidered with intricate patterns that looked almost like vines, like growing things reaching toward the sun. "Ah, 1,000 of them," Lyra admitted. "What if I'm not ready? What if they only accept me because they have to, not because they want to?" "Child." Mara set the dress carefully on the bed and turned to face her with those kind, knowing eyes. "Do you know what I've seen this past week?" Lyra shook her head. "I've seen servants who were afraid to speak before asking you to help settle disputes." Lyra felt warmth spread through her body, her chest. Not the golden thread of the mate bond, but something different, something that felt like belonging, earned through action rather than accident. "They don't accept you because they have to," Mara continued gently. "They accept you because they've seen what you do with power when you have it. You heal, you protect, you speak truth even when it's dangerous. That's not something that can be commanded, dear one. That's something that has to be chosen." The morning passed in a blur of preparation. The dress fit as if it had been made for her specifically, flowing like liquid silver around her body. Mara arranged her hair in an elaborate style, woven through with tiny white flowers that Lyra recognized from Catherine's garden. The same garden that now bloomed more beautifully than ever under her care. When she was finally ready, Lyra barely recognized the woman in the mirror, not because she looked different, but because she looked right, like someone who belonged in a Luna's chambers, someone who could stand beside an Alpha King and be worthy of the position. "He's waiting for you in the garden," Mara said softly. "Tradition dictates that he escort you to the ceremony personally." Lyra found Kyle standing beneath the ancient oak tree at the centre of Catherine's garden. Her garden now, she realised with a start. He was dressed in formal ceremonial clothing, deep blue velvet embroidered with gold that brought out the amber of his eyes. But it was his expression when he saw her that took her breath away. Wonder, pride, love so deep it seemed to radiate from his skin like heat from a forge. "Beautiful doesn't begin to cover it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You look like moonlight given form, like everything I never knew I was waiting for." The golden thread between them hummed with contentment, with rightness, with the deep satisfaction of 2 souls finally finding their perfect match. He offered her his arm, and together they walked toward the great hall where the ceremony would take place. The corridors were lined with pack members, all of them bowing as they passed, but these weren't the fearful, reluctant acknowledgements she'd expected. These were gestures of genuine respect, accompanied by smiles and whispered blessings. The great hall had been transformed into something magical. Thousands of candles cast dancing light on stone walls, draped with silver and blue silk. The entire pack was gathered, filling every available space, their faces turned toward the dais where the ancient ceremony would take place. Elder Thorn waited at the altar, the Luna's crown resting on a velvet cushion beside him. The crown was a work of art, silver worked into delicate patterns that reminded Lyra of tree branches, set with moonstones that seemed to glow with inner fire. "People of the Shadowmere Pack," Elder Thorn's voice carried to every corner of the hall. "We gather today to witness an ancient rite, to welcome a new Luna to her rightful place among us. But more than that, we gather to celebrate the triumph of truth over deception, of courage over fear, of love over hatred." Kyle led her up the steps to the dais, and Lyra felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. But instead of judgment, she saw acceptance. Instead of fear, she saw hope. These people had watched her prove herself not through birthright or political alliance, but through the choices she made when power was placed in her hands. "Lyra Ashwood," Elder Thorne continued, "you have been tested by hardship and found strong. You have been offered the chance to flee from danger and chosen to stand. You have been given power and used it to heal rather than harm. Will you accept the responsibilities of Luna? Will you pledge to protect this pack with your gifts, to lead with wisdom, to rule with compassion?" "I will." The words came out clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the hall. "Alpha King Kale Ravencrest, do you choose this woman as your mate, your equal, your partner in all things? Do you acknowledge her as Luna of this pack, with all the rights and responsibilities that position entails?" "I do." Kale's voice was fierce with pride and certainty. "She is my mate, my chosen Luna, and your queen." Elder Thorne lifted the crown, and Lyra felt her breath catch in her throat. This was it, the moment that would change everything forever. But as the crown was placed on her head, something extraordinary happened. The moonstones began to glow, not with reflected candlelight, but with their own inner radiance. The silver seemed to warm against her skin, and she felt power flow through her unlike anything she'd experienced before. Not just her healing abilities, but something greater. A connection to every member of the pack. A sense of their hopes and fears and dreams. The responsibility of it was staggering, but also profoundly right. "Behold your Luna!" Elder Thorne's voice boomed across the hall. "Chosen by the Alpha King, accepted by the pack, blessed by the moon herself." The roar that erupted from the crowd was deafening. Every person in the hall was on their feet, voices raised in celebration and acceptance. But Lyra only had eyes for Kyle, whose amber gaze held all the love and devotion in the world. "Mine," he said, just loud enough for her to hear over the crowd. The possessive word that had once terrified her now felt like the most beautiful promise ever made. "Yours," she whispered back, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted like forever. As their lips met, something magical happened. Light blazed around them, not just from the crown or her healing abilities, but from the bond itself made visible. Golden radiance surrounded them both, warm and welcoming and absolutely impossible to ignore. The crowd's cheers became reverent whispers as they witnessed the mate bond manifest physically, proving beyond any doubt that these two souls belonged together. That this wasn't political convenience or temporary infatuation, but the kind of connection that transcended ordinary understanding. When they finally broke apart, Lyra looked out over the sea of faces and saw nothing but love reflecting back at her. Love for their Alpha King, yes, but also growing love for the woman who had fought for truth, who had chosen them over safety, who wore power like a mantle of service rather than domination. "My people," she said, and was amazed when her voice carried clearly through the hall without shouting. Another gift of the crown, perhaps, or simply the magic of finally being where she belonged. "I was lost for so long. I forgot what it meant to have a home, to have family, to have purpose beyond mere survival. You have given me all of that, and more. I swear to you now, I will spend every day of my life proving worthy of the trust you've placed in me." The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. There was dancing and feasting, music and laughter that seemed to shake the very stones of the castle. Lyra found herself pulled into conversation after conversation, blessing after blessing, as pack members who had once feared her now competed for the chance to welcome their new Luna personally. But the moment that meant the most came when a small girl, no more than 7 years old, approached the high table with a bouquet of flowers clearly picked from the castle gardens. "For you, Luna," the child said shyly, "because you make the flowers grow pretty again." Lyra accepted the flowers with tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, of overwhelming gratitude for a life she'd never expected to live. As the evening wound down and the last of the guests departed, Kyle took her hand and led her out onto the balcony that overlooked the Packlands. The moon was full overhead, casting silver light on forests and fields that stretched to the horizon. "No regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Lyra leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his breath against her hair, the golden thread that bound them together, singing with contentment. "Only one," she said softly. His arms tightened slightly. "What's that?" She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. "I regret that it took us so long to find each other, that you had to search so long for what was right in front of you all along." His smile was soft, full of the kind of love that made fairy tales seem possible. "Maybe," he said, "we both needed to become the people we are now before we could recognize what we meant to each other. Maybe the waiting, the pain, the searching, maybe all of that was necessary to make us ready for this." As he kissed her again under the light of the full moon, Lyra thought he might be right. Every hardship she'd endured, every loss she'd suffered, every moment of despair in that dungeon cell, all of it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life she'd never dared to dream. She was no longer the forgotten prisoner. She was no longer nobody from nowhere. She was Luna Lyra Ravencrest, chosen queen of the Shadowmere Pack, mate to the Alpha King, and exactly where she was meant to be, forever. 3 months later, Lyra woke to sunlight streaming through windows she never had to close against the cold. The warmth of it on her face still felt like a miracle. Every morning brought the same sense of wonder, that she was here, in this bed, beside this man, living this impossible life that had grown from the ashes of despair. Cale's arm was draped possessively across her waist, his breathing deep and even with sleep, and the golden thread between them hummed with contentment. She slipped carefully from beneath his arm, smiling when he made a soft sound of protest and reached for her even in sleep. 3 months of marriage, and he still couldn't bear to let her go far. The Luna's chambers, her chambers, were filled with morning light and the scent of flowers from the garden below. But more than that, they were filled with life. Books on the shelves that she actually read now, instead of just dusting. Art on the walls that made her smile, instead of reminding her of duties she could never fulfill. A writing desk where she penned letters to other Lunas, building alliances and friendships that strengthened the Pack's position. This wasn't Catherine's room anymore. It was hers, marked by her choices and filled with her happiness. She padded barefoot to the window that looked out over the castle grounds, and her heart swelled at what she saw. The gardens that had been dying when she arrived were now a riot of colour and life. Servants moved through them with purpose and joy instead of fear and resignation. Children played on the grass while their parents worked, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. "Admiring your handiwork," Kyle's voice was rough with sleep and affection. She turned to find him propped up on one elbow, amber eyes warm with love as they traced her form in the morning light. Even after all this time, the sight of him looking at her like she was precious still made her breath catch. "Our handiwork," she corrected, moving back to the bed and settling beside him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." His hand found hers automatically, fingers intertwining in a gesture so natural it might have been choreographed. "You underestimate yourself. You always have." "Maybe, but I'm learning." She leaned against his shoulder, letting herself savour the simple pleasure of being close to him. "Mara says the requests for healing are up again this week. 3 neighbouring packs want to send their injured here for treatment. And what does Luna Lyra say about that?" The title still sent a thrill through her, not because of the power it represented, but because of the trust. Every person who came to her for healing, every pack that sought her aid, was choosing to believe in her abilities, choosing to see her as someone worth approaching instead of someone to fear. Luna Lyra says we should build a proper healing wing, something permanent, with rooms for patients who need extended care and training space for others who want to learn healing arts." She looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. "If the Alpha King approves, of course." "The Alpha King," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "thinks his Luna is brilliant and should follow her instincts. Always." They lingered in bed longer than duty strictly allowed, trading lazy kisses and quiet conversation about pack business, about the healing centre expansion, about the future they were building together one day at a time. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely perfect. Eventually, responsibility called them both. Kyle had meetings with the Pack Council about territorial agreements, and Lyra had a full day of patients waiting in the makeshift healing rooms they'd established in the East Wing. The first was Marcus, a warrior from the Border Patrol who'd taken a nasty fall from his horse the week before. His leg had been slow to heal despite conventional treatment, but Lyra's touch worked the familiar magic. Warmth flowed from her hands, knitting bone and mending muscle until he was whole again. "Thank you, Luna," he said, flexing his leg with wonder. "My mate was so worried. Our first pup is due next month, and she needed to know I'd be able to protect them." "You'll be there for them both," Lyra assured him. "Give Elena my regards and tell her I'll stop by next week to check on how she's feeling." The day continued with a steady stream of pack members seeking aid for everything from training injuries to childhood illnesses to the aches and pains of age. Each person who came to her did so with trust, with hope, with the understanding that she would help if she could. It was everything she'd never known she wanted. In the afternoon, she made her way to the gardens that had become her sanctuary. The Luna's garden was flourishing beyond anything Catherine had achieved, not because Lyra was a better gardener, but because her healing abilities seemed to extend to growing things as well. Plants bloomed out of season under her touch, and the very air seemed to hum with life and growth. She found Kyle there waiting for her, as he did most afternoons when his duties allowed. He was sitting on the stone bench beneath the ancient oak, reading reports that he set aside the moment she appeared. "How were the council meetings?" she asked, settling beside him and automatically leaning into his warmth. "Productive. The Northern Territories want to formalise our alliance, and the Eastern clans are interested in a mutual defence pact." His arm came around her shoulders, holding her close. "It seems having a Luna who can heal has made us quite popular with our neighbours. Is that good or bad? It's good, as long as everyone remembers that your first loyalty is to our pack, not to anyone who might benefit from your abilities." There was something protective in his tone, and Lyra understood. Her reputation as a healer had spread far beyond their territory, bringing requests for aid that sometimes bordered on demands. More than once Kyle had been forced to politely but firmly remind other alphas that his mate was not a tool to be borrowed or a resource to be shared without her consent. "Speaking of the pack," he continued, "Elder Thorne had an interesting suggestion today." "Oh!" Kyle's hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach, and Lyra felt her heart skip. "He thinks it might be time to start considering the pack's future leadership, specifically whether that leadership might benefit from having multiple perspectives." The implication was clear, and Lyra felt heat bloom in her cheeks. They'd talked about children, of course, but in abstract terms, someday, eventually, when they were ready. "And what does the Alpha King think about Elder Thorne's suggestion?" "The Alpha King thinks," Kale said, his voice dropping to the low rumble that made her wolf purr, "that he would very much like to see his mate carrying his pups, would like to watch her body change as new life grows inside her, would like to hold children who have her eyes and her heart and her incredible capacity for love." Lyra turned in his arms to face him fully, seeing the truth written in his amber eyes. Want, yes, but also patience. He would wait as long as she needed, would never pressure her into anything she wasn't ready for. "And what does the Luna think?" he asked softly. She thought about the healing centre they were planning, about the pack members who had become like family, about the life they'd built from the ruins of their individual pain. She thought about tiny hands that might have Kale's strength and her gentleness, about children who would grow up knowing they were wanted and loved and cherished. "The Luna thinks," she said, reaching up to trace his jawline with tender fingers, "that she's spent too many years afraid of hoping for things that seemed impossible. Maybe it's time to start believing in new impossibilities." His kiss was answer enough, passionate and tender and full of promises for the future they would build together. That evening, as they lay entwined in their bed, Lyra traced patterns on Kale's chest and marvelled at how far she'd come. From the broken woman in the dungeon cell to this, queen of her own life, mate to the man of her dreams, healer to a pack that had chosen to love her despite every reason they'd been given to fear her instead. "Do you ever think about that night," she asked softly, "when you first opened my cell door?" "Every day." His hand found hers, bringing it to his lips to press a kiss to her palm. "I think about how close I came to never finding you, how many times I walked past those dungeons without thinking to look inside." "But you did look, eventually." "Eventually?" His arm tightened around her. "I was broken before you, you know. I thought Catherine's death had destroyed my capacity for love, for trust, for hope. I was just existing, going through the motions of leadership without any real connection to why it mattered." Lyra lifted her head to look at him, seeing the vulnerability he rarely let show. "And now? Now I remember why I wanted to be worthy of this position in the first place. You didn't just heal yourself, love. You healed me too. You healed all of us." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the contact. When they broke apart, the golden thread between them was visible in the moonlight streaming through the windows, pulsing with the rhythm of two hearts that beat as one. "I was broken before you," she whispered against his lips, echoing his words. "You were perfect before me," he replied, his voice fierce with conviction. "I just helped you see it." They made love then, slow and sweet and full of promise, not just for the children they might create, but for the years stretching ahead of them, years of ruling together, of healing together, of building something beautiful from the foundation of their unshakable bond. Later, as sleep began to claim them both, Lyra felt a sense of completion that went bone deep. The girl who had once counted stones in a dungeon wall now counted blessings instead. The woman who had believed herself worthless now knew her own value, not because someone else had told her she was precious, but because she learned to see herself through the eyes of love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve their pack, new chances to prove that love really could conquer even the darkest circumstances. But tonight, wrapped in the arms of her mate and surrounded by the life they'd built together, Lyra Ravencrest was exactly where she belonged. She was home. Where are you listening from? Comment below with your favourite moment from Lyra and Kale's journey from the dungeons to the throne. I'd love to hear which part of their story touched your heart the most.